This is a clip from our Patreon Q&A show where every week we answer your questions on everything West Ham. If you're interested in getting your questions answered or just want to see the full episode, head on over to patreon.com/analyticsunited for that and so much more. The first week's free. Enjoy the video.
Yeah, lovely to see so many players performing at their best level again. Great to see Michail have such a good game. Thomas Souček, so good in the last two fixtures. That's been lovely to see. And probably the first time this season we've seen that front 3-4 unit properly firing, even though Lucas Paqueta probably didn't have his best game in this match. He still gets a goal, he still gets into the right positions to create chances for others on a number of occasions. On another day probably could have come away with 2 assists or at least one. Creates a big chance for Thomas Souček winning a turnover inside the Ipswich penalty area. So it felt like as a collective, as a unit, that was the first time we've really seen the talent of our front line come together and be effective in a match.
Yeah, it was kind of beautiful. Not everything. I mean, there was one thing that you mentioned during the breakdown, and we'd sort of spoken about slightly before. And we do have a question on it from Harry C, specifically Clapham. Am I just being a miserable so-and-so, or are we still offering time and space on the ball that better teams will punish us for? Jason as well, who was the press more effective in forcing errors, or was it just poor by Ipswich?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I spoke about in my player performance analysis this week, and when we spoke about Bowen on the breakdown, was that he had performed really incredibly going forward and being such a crucial part of everything we did in attack, but that defensively it wasn't his best day. And I think we saw really similar themes to something that's happened a lot across the season so far, and something that we spoke about in great depth after the first game of the season, because obviously we were looking at all the things out of possession, what's going well, what's not going well. And I think seeing it in such crystal clear style against Ipswich, certainly in the first 25 to 30 minutes of the match, gives us an opportunity to kind of go into yes, of course we win this game 4-1. Yes, of course we managed to force a lot of high turnovers. But what is it about the press that's not quite right, that's allowing other teams to have as much of the ball as they are having and get into the sort of middle thirds and stabilise possession as often as they have been able to? I think as much as Ipswich are a very good side and they have done very well in their transition to the Premier League so far this season, I would have hoped that even though we generated lots of chances in the game, that we would have been able to do that whilst retaining a little bit better control and whilst looking a little bit more cohesive and coherent at the start of the match. That came later in as the match went on, and Kieran McKenna spoke in his post-match press conference about how he felt the first half was really quite even and there were a lot of chances for both sides, and then the second half he said West Ham's quality really showed and they were completely far the better side in the second half. And yeah, it's that control, I think, is the key thing that when you come away from this game and sort of review all of the games so far this season, it's still not quite there. So as much as other things are developing, the in-possession stuff is improving massively, and we're seeing better performances from the players at the top of the pitch. We just want to see that control improve and turn that corner. And I suppose the best way to look into that is with Bowen's role and what's happening out of possession in terms of how teams are breaking out of build-up.
In the pre-match pack, you and Darcy both had spoken about Leif Davis. It was obviously one of the players that was spoken about hugely during their championship run as one of their most effective players, and carry on coming up. And even when we spoke just before we did extra time as well, you both brought him up again and weren't particularly happy with how much space we had ended up giving him in the game.
Yeah, so as I said, this is something that's happened quite a lot this season, and I had hoped that we would sort of rejig the way that we attempted to press to try and stop Davis from being so impactful, to try and stop him really from getting on the ball at all. And that when he did get on the ball, we'd have someone out to him nice and quick to limit his opportunity to be effective when he did get in possession. And actually what we ended up seeing was something akin to what we saw with Luca Dean in the first game with Villa, which is you have a pressing unit. In many ways, the best way I can sum this up, and I spoke about this on the breakdown this week, is that it's almost similar to what you get with Ten Hag, right? Because you have a pressing unit that's quite aggressive. Our PPDA comes right down in this game, so that's the number of passes Ipswich are able to play before we intervene away fewer. I think it's average 9 in this match, which was half what it was against Brentford, so right back down to one of the lowest figures we've recorded this season. So the intent is to go high, to try and force turnovers as high as possible up the pitch and generate good attacking situations, which we did in the game. It's really important to say that the narrow squeeze, the way that Paqueta and Souček were able to be effective on Morsy and Phillips, and the work that Antonio did, really, who was just exemplary in terms of the effort that he put into chasing things, to chasing Muric, to hurrying all of the decisions, massively helped us generate those positive moments. But when it comes to the wingers, instead of the wingers going high onto the centre-backs and then the full-backs pushing forward to support the press, actually what we have is something akin to like I said, Manchester United and Ten Hag, where the defence stay quite deep. Even if the defensive line is pushed all the way onto the halfway line, the defence stay together and the attack press together, and you end up with quite a big gap in the middle of the pitch. And where the space is popping up a lot at the moment in West Ham games from the out of possession perspective is in the wide areas, and particularly in an extremely exaggerated way on our right hand side and the opposition's left hand side. So it was a bit of a disappointment that it's something that came up again in the Ipswich game, because Davis is kind of the danger man, and you would hope that there would be a real focus on limiting his influence. But what we see is, you see in these examples where we're pressing, both Bowen and Kudus going high, as I describe, Antonio kind of having the responsibility of chasing down Muric, often going from O'Shea to Muric, and then Kudus having the responsibility of marking both Ben Johnson and O'Shea. Like I say, Souček and Paqueta pushed up. They switched a lot in terms of who was on which side during the game. I think we started with Paqueta on the left on Morsy, and Souček pushing up onto Phillips. And then really the idea in theory would be that Bowen would have to sort of half and half, in the same way that you'd expect from Kudus, with the fullback and the centre-back. So pushing inside onto Greaves, but then also getting out to Davis when needs be. And you can see in this area that it's a 4v4 if Antonio presses onto Muric. That's a 5v5 if you're including all the players, or we have a 5v4 in the middle of the pitch, which is going to allow us to be really effective in closing these players down and making it really difficult for them to have any time on the ball. But if Antonio starts here, maybe Kudus is half and half between the fullback and the centre-back, then you get into a situation where it's not quite so easy to jump out to Muric as quickly as you might need to. He gets an extra second on the ball, and what he can do with that extra second on the ball is play the ball straight out to Leif Davis, who has a huge amount of space on this side. And we've seen both Villa and Ipswich make use of this. It's a bit of a concern. It's probably our biggest concern with what's happening out of possession at the moment, because other managers should really be paying attention to this and then looking at how they can incorporate it into how they play to escape and build up consistently. And the way that both sides have done it is just by inverting the midfielder on that side of the pitch and generating that box midfield shape. So you can see the same space exists on this side. Say Kudus is caught inside in one of these moments, and Muric could go out to Johnson. But because Wes Burns isn't coming so far inside and exaggerating this position and dragging Emerson in quite so much, you have Wes Burns maybe sitting a little bit wider. It allows Emerson to take up this position. If the ball goes out here, Kudus can drift across. These two players can easily drift across with their men as well. You've got Emerson on Burns. The opportunities to then actually get out in these situations aren't quite so good for Ipswich. Whereas on the other side of the pitch, because Clark is coming inside and our defenders are so keen to stay man-to-man, to not jump forward and support the press, to stay with the forwards and make sure that none of the forwards have any space, Wan-Bissaka's often coming all the way inside into like a number 6 start position. We saw this in the Chelsea match as well, where he was drifting all the way inside with Enzo Fernandez, or was jumping forward to press onto Cucurella, trying to make up that ability to control what's going on in the middle of the pitch. And it's a real focus, obviously, for Lopetegui to control the middle. Don't allow anything through the centre of the pitch. If you are going to allow any space, make sure the space that you allow is in the wide areas. But it becomes easy for teams to exaggerate that, and that's exactly what Ipswich did, basically, was get out to Davis, and not just get out to Davis when he's this deep. Davis was able to run, all the way up sometimes to near the halfway line, and then receive these balls from Muric straight out to over the entire pressing unit. That's cutting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 players out of the game and putting them straight into a 3v3. If Burns can make this run in behind Emerson, you have Delap, Davis, Burns against Emerson, Kilman and Todibo, straight one pass out from the back, which is not a dynamic that you particularly want to see defensively. Same thing also is possible with Davis receiving deeper, is you're able to get the same advantages on the left side, because Wan-Bissaka is inside. You see situations early in the match, and Delap actually gets him behind on one occasion doing this, just rolling off Todibo into the wide space, and then it's just a very simple pass from Davis straight up the line to Delap, and you're getting the striker in behind. And there are plenty of examples of this in the first half. You can see here Muric looking for that ball out to Davis, the team shaping it exactly the way that I described, with Bowen pushing forward onto Greaves, Kudus onto O'Shea, Souček and Paqueta jumping high, Antonio not quite as aggressive on Muric on this example, and this is all it takes. It just takes a half second switching off. Anyone switches off for a moment, keeper gets the space, Davis hands in the air, ball goes out to Davis, straight through the entire press, straight into the attack. Same again, just a little bit later. Antonio with a bit of a longer jump this time because the ball's come in from the right-hand side. Can't get to Muric in time. Ball out to Davis. Cut 5 players out of the game with one pass. Again, and then even higher up the pitch, you see how intent we are on really having control of that central zone and how much space we're happy to give for Morsey to just play one switch all the way out to Davis. And in this example, Davis is receiving one pass that's taken, 7 players out of the game, really, which is not ideal and not something you should be allowing. And it's clearly a theme because looking back to Villa, you have the exact same thing happening. Martinez to Digne, all the exact same passes in behind Bowen in the press. And it's very easy, even if Bowen is able to make, there's this example where Bowen and Sofal do a really good job of detaching in time just to get there as soon as the ball's dropping for Digne. But because both Villa and Ipswich are inverting one of their midfielders or bringing one of their midfielders inside, it becomes quite easy for whether it's Davis, Digne or any left back really in the Premier League to just play one pass, bounce it straight into now the free player in the centre of the pitch, and you're through in actually a more dangerous central area. And we saw it for Villa's winner in the first game of the season. So to see it now, 6 game weeks on, the exact same themes occurring from a defensive perspective. This is why it's our biggest concern. Mathiasen comes on. You again have the defence really narrow. You see Ramsey stepping inside. That's pulling Sofal probably too narrow and is exaggerating that space in the wide zone. The ball goes out to Mathiasen. The exact same dynamic. The fullback detaches, but it opens the player inside. You have a first-time pass into Ramsey, and Ramsey is able to cut it back for Duran, who obviously scored the winner in that game. And this is probably the best example because it's very difficult to get shots from the angles that we get at West Ham of exactly what's happening in the defensive structure. But this is what the consequence ultimately becomes of setting up this way. So this is actually when Paqueta did win the ball nice and high, as I described at the top of the video, and played it across to Souček, and it was a really good chance for us. But in that moment, what you see is Wan-Bissaka and Todibo on the exact same vertical line, with Clark pulling Wan-Bissaka all the way inside. So you can see that entire, from our perspective, right flank, and from the opposition's perspective, left flank of the pitch is almost completely undefended. And what that then causes is what we see for a lot of the second half of the Ipswich match, and for periods of the Villa match, and then for almost the entirety of the Crystal Palace match, is we see Bowen, instead of being part of the pressing unit, being able to be in positions to be effective in those turnover moments. And he's probably the player you want most in those situations. Who would you want the ball to drop to finish a chance? If we do win it high, you'd want it to be Bowen. Instead of him being there, actually what ends up happening is that you've got the same dynamics deeper, and then Bowen becomes your right back to try and protect it against that. So you end up with just the 4 players in this area. It makes it harder to press the keeper. Probably makes it even easier for those balls to go out to the fullbacks, but you are suddenly then able to actually get out on both sides of the pitch, with Bowen dropping a little bit deeper, Emerson also there, and then you allow Kilman to take control of the winger if Emerson needs to detach. So it's the solution that we've arrived at. It's probably not the perfect one, because in many ways you don't really want Bowen to end up playing right back for you for a lot of the games.
Yeah, the repeatability, that's the concern for me, right? Because when we spoke about this and we saw the question, and I remember so vividly, to pull the curtain back for the people here, welcome to Behind the Curtain, when we did the video, the one that is called something like How Unai Emery Unpicked West Ham or something. It's something along those lines. And I was getting you to send me the screenshots of examples of exactly what you're talking about, of Luca Digne being in just acres of space. And you sent me about 15,000. It was like I was sitting there to do a video. It was like, here's one, here's another, here's another, here's another, here's another, here's another. And you're like, oh man, oh man. And it's that similar feeling. And then again, when we were going through before the breakdown, we were all going through some of the bits of the West Ham match again for the Ipswich game. And you made me pause on that exact screenshot you just showed, where it's just Bowen by himself, sort of deep because of what's happened. And it's like, listen, if it's a solution and it works in that one game, that's a beautiful thing. We're in a situation, obviously, where solutions like that are not easy to come by. And so if you can get a win while you're at it, fine. It's not exactly something that you want to permanently stick by.
I suppose the question that to take it on to the next level, which is, what do you do to resolve this? How do you deal with this situation? Is probably quite simple for me in terms of the solution. So I personally, rather than seeing Bowen ending up in these positions, would much prefer it if that's your initial pressing structure and you think, the biggest problem with this is that the left back ends up in loads of space and we don't really have anyone to deal with it, is that instead of having Wan-Bissaka coming in here, you'd have Wan-Bissaka passing his man off into these areas and then moving forwards. And then you have either two solutions. If the striker's rolling out to this side of the pitch, then you have one of these players drop and Bowen comes inside to cover that spare man in the double pivot for the opposition. Or if the striker is in the middle of the pitch and Kilman would be able to take that player, then you can actually commit even higher to the press. And then the centre-back can step up and be tight enough in these situations. It's going to be very difficult for this player to receive any kind of long ball and control it before the centre-back's able to get there and either make a foul or physically engage the player to force a turnover. And actually, in a lot of these situations, especially when it's players like Jack Clarke, who is very talented but isn't particularly physical, I'd be quite happy, really, for us to allow Wan-Bissaka to detach up here to push on to Davis and still maintain that intensity of the press, knowing that, Todibo's probably got a few yards to make up, but when he gets there, by the time the ball's dropped, he's going to be able to get a shoulder in something. And he probably might knock Clarke over a few times, give away a few free kicks, but that's not necessarily a massive problem because the effectiveness of the press in advanced areas is going to be so good. We're going to be able to win so many high turnovers that conceding a few free kicks is probably less dangerous than allowing Davis to have loads of space and chances to play the lap straight in behind from two passes and players being cut out of the press cut out of the game way too easily by balls going over the top.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what you spoke about on the breakdown with Cal in terms of the Todibo Wan-Bissaka relationship and the fact like this is like they've only just started playing together, so it's not quite there. But once they get there, eventually that idea of being able to pass a person off and just then move, and even just instinctively it happening and being in a situation where they see the scenario, they see the ball's gone back to the goalkeeper has it, Wan-Bissaka starts moving and Todibo instantly knows where he sort of has to move with that. It's those things that just sort of grow over time and very rarely do you ever get something that clicks like that, especially in those quite complex moments defensively, because, as a centre-back, especially if your concern is, if I make a mistake here, they're going to be through on goal 1v1 and it's going to be a bad situation for us all. There's always that hesitation to go, I'll just do this. So once it becomes that natural flow of the game and you're just in your head, that muscle memory of doing it, it's a little bit easier than expecting him to do it. Day one. It's not quite day one, but day 4 or whatever we're at.
Sure. I suppose the only thing you wonder is how much of this is tactical and how much of it is individual relationships and ability to execute on the pitch, because we're seeing in game week 1 it happening with Mavropanos and Sofal, who are players that have played together before, and then exactly the same dynamics occurring with Todibo and Wan-Bissaka many games later. And I suppose I look at teams that, and perhaps I'm being a little bit disparaging when I say this, but I look at teams that want to retain this extra player deeper while still trying to press is almost trying to have your cake and eat it at the same time. And that's always been my opinion of what Ten Hag has done a lot of the time at Man United is you either press or you don't. If you try and press in this way but don't properly support the press, or you leave spare players, good teams will just exploit those gaps and score goals in those situations. And I think a better team in the first 25 minutes in the Ipswich game probably would have been able to generate more good opportunities off of these situations where they were getting Davis out in space and in good areas, quite high up the pitch with one pass straight from the goalkeeper. So I think, really ultimately, if you're going to press and properly commit to it, rather than leaving this spare player on the back line, because if naturally it's 11v11, it's a numbers game at the end of the day. If you're leaving one player spare with no one to go out to on your back line, there is going to be one player spare for the opposition somewhere deeper that's going to be a free option to pass to and to get out of build up.